Now that wasn't a news camera, but I mean, every family had one back in the 40s, 50s, and 60s, and every family, it seems, designated somebody to learn how to take pictures, and then you take the film out and you send it to the drugstore. Why the drugstore? I don't never know. But everybody sent to the drugstore and you come back 2 weeks later and you get your pictures. Luckily, we don't have to go through that anymore. If I would have had this device in my career, I would not have had to have 4 back surgeries. It was a different beast, and we all kind of went through it. But anyways, I was born in Winnipeg, Manitoba, Canada, right in the middle of World War II. And my father was an Icelandic immigrant to Canada, and my mother was a Canadian born in Moose Jaw, Saskatchewan. In case you don't recognize, the little Chevy guy is me. At the close of World War II, my family decided to emigrate back to Iceland. We took the maiden flight of an airline called Loftleiðir, that later became now it's Icelandic Airways. And I am the one in the middle of the staircase right there. You can barely see me. Anyways, okay, now I want you to pay attention. Back in the 1940s, this was the Icelandic internet. Today, we hit a button, and email goes around the world in seconds. This was the way mail was delivered to Husavik, Iceland in 1947. And that's me trying to get on the postman's force. You'll notice if you're real careful, I've got a tear in the back of my pants. That was always kind of a ruffian. Anyway, after over 4 years in Iceland, we decided to immigrate to the United States. I want you to really pay attention to the fact that I've got a tie on, number 1. Number 2, I've got a tweed coat and my hair is combed. I want you to contrast that with the following photograph. I guess I don't need to tell you, but I'm the second one from the left. I don't think I broke his arm, but I was a little ruffian back then. This was in Sebastopol, California. I was raised it's in Sonoma County, the wine country. I didn't realize at the time, but it was really an idyllic way to grow up. And I adapted quickly to being American. And despite being an immigrant, I still consider myself right now an American. We did all the usual guy stuff. We played sports. We were so good we didn't even need helmets. And through the years, though, my spiritual life, I'm going to admit, has been like a yo-yo. I've been up and down and sideways, and you just couldn't figure it out. But what I was given early on was a Christian foundation by my parents. I didn't have the choice of saying, no, I don't feel like going to church today. You went to church, and that's what you did, and that's where you learned, and you got that foundation. And I have returned to that foundation over and over again, and especially here at Good Shepherd. It's been really important in my life. I was raised in the Lutheran Church, Missouri Synod. You've heard of that? That's the conservative one. Real conservative. I went to Lutheran College, California Concordia College, for 2 years. But I didn't really feel any direction in my life. And I was in my, I think it was 19. And I didn't know it at the time, but this was probably the most important decision in my life. In the early 1960s, our involvement in Vietnam was just starting. It hadn't really gotten hot yet, but most of you in this room remember what a difference that made in everybody's life. It really did. I didn't want to wait to be drafted, so I volunteered to go into the Army in the spring of 1963. And the reason I volunteered is because you got to name your profession, your job in the military. And I had dabbled a little bit in photography in high school, but the prospect of being a combat motion picture photographer, boy, that sounded good. So anyways, after training, I was assigned to the photo unit in Fort Hood, Texas. It was kind of the perfect training ground because only the US government, the Army, could give you unlimited film supply. And so I would shoot all the time, all day, and just tanks and armored personnel carriers and explosions and things. You know, and it was just the most fantastic way of learning the photo profession. And it was something I found that I could do better than anybody else. It was one of those, these things are all automatic, you know, the telephones. Back then you had to know things like f-stops, shutter speeds, and screen direction. You know, the good guys had to go from right to left, bad guys from left to right. You know, all of the little techniques, and I seemed to really gravitate toward it. And it left my mind to concentrate on the creative side. And here's the key. I found that I had my own little Shakespearean stage inside that viewfinder. And I could kind of manipulate it, and I could, you know, and I was the director, and I could decide when I rolled the camera and when I didn't. And it was kind of, I don't know, I hate to say it, a little bit powerful, you know. Anyways, my next duty assignment took me overseas to Korea. Every part of my duties was to film the peace talks, believe it or not, that were still going on in Panmunjom in North Korea. This was like 1964, early 1964. And on one side of the table would be the North Koreans and the Chinese and the Russians, and then the United Nations American military on the other side. Unlike video, working with film was tactile. It was very hands-on. And I can still remember holding up a piece of film like this to my nose, and that was 3 seconds. 3 seconds of video, and it was just, and then you would glue it together, end on end, and you put it in a projector, and there was your story. After the military, I quite naturally gravitated to a career in TV news. I started with you know who, in Wichita, Kansas, I think about 1966, 67, and we were at competing stations at the time, and we would kind of glance at each other every now and then, you know, out on stories. But TV news back in those days was fairly simplistic. The FCC required TV stations to put on some kind of local programming, and they just decided, you know, well, we'll just do some news, you know, and they did it as cheaply as possible. So we didn't get a lot of money. I think my first paycheck was $95 for a 45-hour week. So, and gradually that increased over the years, but thank goodness. We pretty much left the serious journalism at that time to the newspapers, but that was about to change. I really enjoyed covering like the personalities of the day. This little vignette, that's Bob Hope talking to SMU, and he was always he was really nice TV cameraman, you know, and some people weren't, but he was really gracious in allowing his speeches to be filmed and things like that. The political dynamism of the 1960s took me by surprise a little bit. I learned early on that the news business is more serious than I planned. During one of the multitudes of riots in the 1960s, I was stabbed. Now, I like to say I was stabbed in the back, but it happened to be the very lower back, otherwise known as my gluteus maximus. Anyway, it was one of those early lessons to be learned. The primary camera we used back in those days, it was fairly small, but it only shot silent film. It wasn't sound, so it wasn't useful for a lot of things, but it was called a Bell & Howell's 70DR, 16mm movie camera. It was virtually indestructible. It carried 100 feet of film, and that lasted 2 minutes and 45 seconds, and then you had to reload. So you're always thinking, oh, do I have enough to get that shot? You know, it was very, very frustrating. We gradually added elements. When I started, all film was in black and white. And who can tell me why it was in black and white? Because all TV sets were in black and white. We didn't need to shoot color because the person wasn't going to see it at home anyway. So, but then color in the 1970s was added, and we had to make the big switch. In order to add sound to the equation, I developed a series of gadgets. I was kind of known as the gadget man. I would get our sound camera, which was very heavy, off and onto a portable unit, and that added microphones and the sound amplifier on the side and a power pack on the back. This particular story was the first heart bypass surgery in Dallas at St. Paul Hospital. A lot of what I did back in the early days was one-man band. That means I was photographer, reporter, sound. Here I did an interview with former Governor John Conley. The microphone was on a long extension, and up near my viewfinder, if you look real close, you can see a notebook. On that notebook are my questions. So everything, the gadget came. One of the landmark stories of my early career, and this was when I was at Channel 5, was the death of Santos Rodriguez, young kid. He was suspected of a burglary. So a policeman named Darrell Kane took him in the back of his patrol car and decided to interrogate him, and did it with a what they call Russian roulette. And he didn't fix it right, so the gun went off. The young boy was killed, and understandably, I mean, the community was absolutely outraged, and it started one of a series of protests that rocked this community forever. You might notice the voice of the reporter.
Demonstrators turned violently on 4 police officers who were directing traffic around the demonstration, knocking them to the pavement. At this point, 2 police motorcycles were set ablaze, and a Channel 8 television news mobile unit was heavily damaged by angry demonstrators. The department's tactical squad gathered on a parking lot near Commerce and Harwood Streets. The angry crowd shouted obscenities and tried to hit the officers with bottles and cans, but the officers did not respond. The policemen would periodically don gas masks and prepare to defend themselves, but they did not move against the crowd. Meanwhile, bands of demonstrators moved down Commerce and Main Streets, smashing store windows. Then, members of the tactical squad broke formation.
That was quite we were shooting film at that time, and as a budgetary method, the station that I was working for would only buy 100-foot rolls of film, color, magnetic stripe for sound. And so I had to reload my camera 9 times in the middle of a ride. So it was very challenging. I mean, I moved over to Channel 8, and that really became my biggest career change. And I'll give you a little taste.
His reputation for news comes from experience, because he's been bringing you award-winning news longer than any newsman in town, and Tracy Rowlett's teamed up with Gudjohnsen. She's one of a kind. She brings a warmth and dedication to news nobody else can match. His first-hand experience has been keeping you up on sports through some of the best seasons in history. Vern Lundquist. When it comes to sports, he's the name of the game. Troy's the only weatherman in town to give you the whole story. He tells you what's best to do come rain or shine, when it's time to plant and when the fish are biting. Watch News 8. You'll get the experience of Tracy Rowlett. Gudjohnsen brings you the best in news. Vern Lundquist is the name of the game. Troy Dungan gives you the best weather in Texas.
You can count on us, Channel 8. You can count on us, Channel 8 News.
Everybody recognizes the bow tie. And that was the crew that was pretty much with me for most of my career at Channel 8. Everybody kind of mixed and went different ways after a while, but those were the real good days. After I moved to Channel 8, we converted from shooting film, to a new element, and it was called video, and it gave us the ability to go live. Does everybody know what live is? It was both a challenge, and I'm not so sure it wasn't a curse, because what we lost was think time. In other words, instead of having 2 hours to process your film and then think about what you're going to write, what you wound up doing was having to immediately go on the air from the scene that you've just gotten 2 bits of information. And you're expected to fill 2 minutes with 2 facts. And losing that think time has changed the dimension of our business a lot. And you'll see it on the air where some reporter will tell you live, I don't want to speculate, but, and then they'll continue to speculate for the next three minutes. So, I mean, the business has really changed, and Tracy and I are glad to be retired. What you can see is the live band in the background. That was a piece of gear. Each one of those cameras, I'm in the middle. You probably don't recognize me because I was skinny. And we had those trousers, bell-bottom trousers. Anyways, here I was carrying that sound camera. That film was about maybe 60 pounds. This is on my left shoulder was a video recorder, and that weighed 40 pounds. And the camera on my right shoulder weighed 45 pounds. And if I needed a portable light, like inside, that was 20 pounds. And so I was carrying about 100 pounds. And it's no wonder I had 4 back surgeries. I have to tell you this one little vignette. A buddy of mine, Bill Tippett, he was still at the competing station at Channel 5. He was carrying one of those belts around him. These were real heavy belts. And he had a camera over here and a voice and a video recorder on his left shoulder. And we were doing what we call a perp walk. That, in the basement of Lou Sterrett, the jail, you get the perp murder or somebody being brought in, and you get to walk him to the front of the jail. Well, in the middle of the walk, poor Bill's pants dropped to his ankle. And you have all this gear on and you can't pick those things up. So we were doing this. It was pretty funny. He didn't think so, but we all did. But now the technology not only changed, but the quality of the stories dramatically increased. And we decided that now we're competing with the newspapers. We're going to be doing very serious journalism. And our corporate leaders at Belo decided that we need to flex our journalistic muscles. So Dennis Trout and I were assigned to go to Southeast Asia to document the genocide perpetrated by a megalomaniac named Pol Pot. And there is 1 or 2 scenes in this that are fairly dramatic, and I apologize for that, but I edited out a lot of the worst stuff, so please just bear with me.
Cambodia is dying in one way or another. Its culture is finished, and the Cambodian race itself faces extinction. You can see its tormented death steps along the jungle trails that cross the frontier into Thailand. You can hear the sound of its agony in the voices of its children. You can feel the earth shudder as competing military factions pound at one another for control of what little is left. Those still caught in the middle of the struggle, perhaps 500,000 people, move in groups along the border between Cambodia and Thailand, waiting for the end of this war, or in a few cases, hoping for the chance to start another one.
We returned from Cambodia about a week later, and we did an hour-long documentary, and we used it, the station did it as a fundraiser. We raised that one evening $50,000. In today's dollars, that would be quite a bit more. This was 1979. Dennis later went on to an illustrious career at CNN and ABC. And during my career, I traveled to 39 countries with Channel 8. We were number 1 in the ratings year after year. Who can tell me who this guy is? I heard it. Chubby Checker. You get an extra dessert. The reason I showed this picture is not so much Chubby Checker, but that picture appeared recently on Facebook, and someone was asking who the photographer was. And you can see who the photographer is. My lovely wife, Jo, picked up on the fact that if you look in the lower left-hand corner, you see the number 6. I was number 6 forever, and all my gear was labeled number 6. But the funniest thing is, Bert Shipp, our assignment editor, would call the house looking for me, and he referred to her as 6½. Getting a little more serious again, this one always kind of doesn't intrigue me. It makes me really think hard. You remember that now there's a lot of courtroom video that comes out. Some states have made it legal. But back in this era, early 70s? Yeah, 70s. Cameras in the courtroom were not allowed. And somehow Tracy managed to talk us into a courtroom in McKinney where the judge was sentencing an accused to the death penalty. And cameras were not allowed to count. So this moment became pretty much a historical moment, and ABC picked it up.
35-year-old XL White, convicted as the trigger man in a triple murder during a 1974 holdup, told a judge he doesn't deserve forgiveness and asked for execution as early as possible. As if that wasn't dramatic enough, Collin County Judge Tom Ryan yesterday permitted a TV news crew from our affiliate WFAA in Dallas to record the actual sentencing. The convicted murderer, here on the right, was shackled to an accomplice as they made their way into the courthouse. Reporter Tracy Rowlett of WFAA picks up the story.
First before the bench was the 38-year-old White, the trigger man, and his comments surprised the handful of bystanders who could hear him.
I don't live myself no more. I have finally put together how 3 people died, and I'm the one who killed those people. And it's a hell of a thing to live with. I'm not going to ask for forgiveness, you know, because I don't deserve it. All I ask the court to grant me the nearest execution date possible.
Collin County Judge Tom Ryan called a 10-minute recess after listening to White's plea for a speedy execution. But when he passed sentence, he made it clear that White's feelings were not on his mind.
Any compassion that this court might show, sir, is not directed towards you. It's directed, if anything, toward the 3 lives that you just destroyed one day in this county. Yes, sir. The warden of the penitentiary is hereby commanded to keep you in his custody until the Friday, the 10th day of December, 1976. Upon which day at the state penitentiary in Huntsville, Texas, at some hour before sunrise in a room arranged for the purpose of the execution, the said warden is hereby directed and commanded to pass and caused to be passed through the body of you, sir, the said XL White, a current of electricity of sufficient intensity to cause the death of you, sir, the said XL White, and to continue to apply and continue to pass and cause to be passed said current of electricity through the body of you, sir, the said XL White, until the said XL White is dead. We'll stand recess.
Barely audible from White was a "thank you, Judge," before he was led back to an inner courthouse room. His court-appointed defense lawyer says he is now prepared to appeal White's sentence to the U.S. Supreme Court, even if his client doesn't want him to. Tracy Rowlett for ABC News in McKinney, Texas.
That sound still haunts me, and the fact that it was so historic at the time really makes me think. George H.W. Bush, not to be confused with George W. Bush, we really had pretty good access to his office because he was from Texas, and so we got to do a lot of things that other people didn't, local TV stations didn't get to do. He had a big fundraising base, and so he wanted to please them, and so he gave us tons of access. We went to the Middle East with him, and we went to Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, Oman, and Yemen. And from all of those, we did live shots back to our station in Dallas. and we did an hour-long documentary on our return. He was very gracious to us. Tracy and I did multiple series and documentaries together, but the most important was a series of reports we did documenting the fall of communism in the Soviet Union, the Baltics, and Eastern Europe. This was in Petersburg, I believe. And of course, Red Square, you have to go there. We were in Moscow, and then we moved on to the Baltics. Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia were the first countries to seek freedom from the Soviets. And I have to share this little backstory. I hope it doesn't embarrass you too much. We were in Latvia, and the Western press had been banned from going into Lithuania. And so, Mr. Wonderful, he talks our host into driving us into Lithuania. And not only that, we're getting good video and kind of keeping to ourselves. But then he decides he wants to do a stand-up. Now, you know what a stand-up is? That's where the reporter stands up in front of the camera and speaks some wisdom. But he decides he wants to do it in front of KGB headquarters. So we get away with that one. And so we're starting to leave and go back to Latvia. And suddenly we see this truck loaded with Soviet soldiers. And he says, "Driver, pull up behind, John, get pictures of this." So I'm getting pictures. Suddenly all these soldiers see us and start yelling at their driver to go chase us. So they're trying to turn around. Luckily, we made it back to Latvia that evening, or we would have wound up in a gulag in Siberia somewhere, probably still be there. No matter where Texans were found, we would travel there to do a story. This was a group of Dallas researchers doing work on the Great Barrier Reef in Belize.
Comes the complex environment on the Great Belizean Barrier Reef. Channel 8's John Gudjohnsen will film the reef. Using an underwater tank and a camera in special housing, Gudjohnsen will dive with the teachers to study the complex formations along the reef. Coral reefs are among the most productive and diverse of all known environments. Thousands of species of fish, mollusks, crustaceans, worms, and algae depend on these coastal habitats built up by millions upon millions of coral skeletons. Along this shoreline, the reef extends for 175 miles, and for all of that distance, its top layer is alive with a complicated mixture of water animals and plants.
I had never dived before. And so that camera, it was a film camera, and it had a 100-foot load. So every time I'd shoot for 2.5 minutes, and I'd have to get back in the boat, take all my gear off, get into the camera, and reload, and then get back in the water. Tracy's a co-anchor. You saw her picture earlier. Iola Johnson, she decided she wanted to go to Somalia. There was a famine going on, one of the many famines that they have in Africa. And this was in the, I think, early 1980s. And claimed untold lives, and was my first touch with kind of the tragedy there.
Food sits rotting on the docks, while thousands sit starving on the border. With so little food available, there are stringent rules for distribution. This armband entitles a refugee to a daily ration of 1 cup of soybean milk with sugar. They get these armbands only after being stripped, weighed, and measured. No one knows how many of these people will survive.
Yeah, that's a tough one. It was Scott Pilley, who was, I don't know whether you know, he was 60 Minutes, and he was, I guess, ABC or CBS anchorman for a long time, but he started his career at Channel 8. And one of the first things we did was in Central America. Do you remember the Contras? It was kind of funded by the U.S. Rebel movements to try to retake Nicaragua. He and I were with the Contras for...
Of the Contras' infiltration routes. He is contacting Comandante Valente on the other side. When the two patrols have made contact, the supplies move out. Sacks of beans and rice are carried on the backs of soldiers, some of whom are not old enough to drive in the United States. The mountain that separates the two countries is steep, the heat exhausting. Intelligence indicates Sandinista troops are only a few kilometers away. After hiking over the mountain, we have finally arrived in Nicaragua, and in many ways, it is the logistics of this war that is most difficult. On the other side of the mountain, extreme heat as the troops brought the sacks of ammunition and food, and on the other side of the mountain, a pouring rainstorm. Standing in the rain is 13-year-old Santos, one of Valente's soldiers now receiving the benefits of the private aid. These soldiers have lived on the margins so long, hot coffee is luxury.
Yeah, young kids kind of makes you treasure your own young ones, grandkids. Back here at home in the 80s, crack cocaine became a big deal. And it was pretty much marketed here by a string of drug gangs from Jamaica. And the Dallas police really having a hard time with them. In fact, our murder rate was the highest it's ever been. In fact, I think we wound up one year doing one murder per day, 360 some odd.
With a lot of the Jamaicans we're running up against, it's a status symbol. It's make a name for yourself that you shot at the police or are willing to shoot it out.
They'll kill anybody, absolutely anybody. Nothing makes a difference to them.
Aldo, man. And he's a Jamaican also.
They're all three of them are semi-automatic?
Right, 45 automatic.
It's a Tech 9 9mm. It'll fire as fast as you pull the trigger.
This is an ounce and a half.
Danger comes when least expected. After this race,
I was really blessed to work with a variety of reporters. This one is Cindy Kennard. We went to the Gulf War, the first one, not the second one, but the first one. And that was George H.W. that organized a group to go over there. Before it started, we were in Amman, Jordan, and these wonderful reporters, they're the dreamers. Photographers are the realists. Reporters are kind of up there and thinking about things too much. But she managed to get us a flight from Amman, Jordan, into Baghdad. Now, Saddam Hussein had taken hostage all of the oil rig drillers from Texas. He was holding them in hotels in Baghdad hostage so that we wouldn't start the war. And so he allowed us to come in to interview, to get the word out that he was holding them hostage. And so we got to go in and do all these interviews. And my thought was, he's holding them hostage. What is he stopping them holding us hostage? We managed to get out after, I think, 3 days. As a result, later in the war, the cruise missiles at that time were called Scuds. And we were in Jerusalem and Tel Aviv. And every night there would be 3 or 4 Scuds landing in Israel and in Tel Aviv, and then we would go live from Jerusalem. We, as a result of that, we won a very prestigious award, the Columbia DuPont Journalism Award, which is considered like the Pulitzer of broadcast journalism. That was our station award, because we had people in Saudi Arabia. We were pretty much everywhere. One of my treasured possessions, and I drag it out every now and then when I need an ego boost, this is a possession filled with all my press badges over the years. And each of those badges I can pick out and say, yeah, I remember that one. Yeah, I remember that one. Some stories simply walked in the front door of our station. I'll have to let you see this one.
Then at about 4:15 this afternoon, 6 hours after the courthouse shootings, a man came into the Channel 8 lobby and asked to see me. He said he was the gunman in the Tarrant County slayings. Channel 8 news photographer John Gudjohnsen and I went to the lobby where the man identified himself as 45-year-old George Lott of Arlington. Gudjohnsen asked if he had a gun. The man turned, raised his shirt, and revealed a Glock 9mm handgun loaded, and John took it. We asked if he had any other weapons, and he said no, but then pulled up a pant leg to reveal another clip for the pistol. We took that too. And as other Channel 8 staffers called police, John and I went with Mr. Lott into an office and talked with him until police arrived.
It's a horrible, horrible thing that I have done today. It's a horrible thing.
The man who identified himself as George Lott seemed calm and wanted to talk.
At this point, there is a backstory to this also, and I'm going to let Tracy tell the backstory. The gun, I took it from him, but as a matter of course, I loaded the gun, we thought.
Well, the thing is, first of all, I didn't know that John was going to do this. So let me, in my octogenarian way, let me think back. Actually, what happened was that John took the clip out, but what he didn't realize is that it also put one in the chamber. So we're sitting in our news director's office where this interview was done, and John, who was, of course, full of all kinds of energy because we were doing this very important interview, has the gun in his hand, and he said, well, you sit over here, and then you sit over here. And finally, I stopped the whole thing and said, John, give me that. I took the gun, but it did have one in the chamber.
Thank you, Tracy, for that. That's kind of the way I remember it. One thing that was kind of an understandable end to my career was probably my final story that I did at Channel 8. And I returned full circle to the country where I came from.
This week, we have been bringing you a series of reports about people in search of their roots, their origins, their families.
Tonight, a personal journey from a member of our News 8 family. News manager John Gudjohnsen is one of the many behind-the-scenes people in our newsroom that our viewers never see. He has a major role in deciding what news we bring you every day. And before that, John spent 16 years here as a news photographer.
Well, last fall, John Gudjohnsen returned to his homeland on a personal journey. Tonight, in the conclusion of our special series, Finding Family, John shares his experiences from his trip to Iceland.
The myths of the hot springs cloud my vision, just as time has clouded my memory of this place. For the first time in 45 years, I've returned to my homeland, a land that now seems strange and unfamiliar. Iceland is a tiny country at the top of the world, and my wife Jo and I have come on a pilgrimage into my past that many Americans feel compelled to take. It's September, and we start our trip as typical tourists, traveling the rugged land, dutifully photographing awesome scene after scene. Waterfalls the equal of Niagara, geysers that make Old Faithful look like a drinking fountain. I feel a sense of pride that my forefathers could tame such a wild land. But these are just the stage and the props. We have really come for the actors, my people and my family. I'm glad to see my cousin Ulli and his wife Ragnar, who welcome us back. We played together as children. Through the years, Ulli has been my contact with my past, through letters and Christmas cards. I have often wondered about my family's closeness, and as I watch the annual sheep roundup, I begin to understand that family teamwork is an ethic here. And so is family time together. My most vivid memories from more than 4 decades ago include our many family trips to the local swimming pools, heated to bathwater temperature by the underground hot springs. Our visit now takes a very personal turn. Far in the northern part of Iceland, in a little town called Húsavík, more than 100 members of the Gudjohnsen family assemble. We're there to honor my great-grandfather Thorður, a turn-of-the-century merchant and trader. He's to be commemorated with a statue at the edge of the harbor. My cousin Jón has traveled from California to be here, and he feels what I'm experiencing, a strong sense of belonging.
It's nice to be included in something and not have to pursue it. Join a club, be in a company. You're born into it, and you can't get away from it, and you don't want to get away from it.
Icelanders are a stoic people, but I know that they're also touched by this gathering of the family from all over the world. It's an experience that has nothing to do with logic. Logic would pose the questions, why am I here halfway around the world? Why am I standing in a freezing Arctic wind, listening to speeches in a language I don't understand, honoring a man I never knew? And yet I feel a warm familiarity with my surroundings and pride that one of my own is being honored. On this journey home, I realize family bonds go beyond logic to an area of our psyche we probably will never understand. But do we really need to? Instead, we raise a toast to our heritage, to each other, to our family. John Gudjohnsen for Project 8, Family First, Husavik, Iceland.
That was kind of a nice trip to kind of make it full circle. I kind of wondered if the postman was still there with his horse. My last decade at Channel 8 took on a very different role, as you saw in the beginning of that piece. After carrying heavy gear for I guess 16 or 17 years, my back finally gave out. But I was blessed to get the job as assignment editor. So I got to play with satellite trucks and helicopters and sent people hither and yon. And it was a very powerful kind of feeling, but you always were the one that was blamed if things went wrong. But I had lost there was an empty feeling not having that camera. I had looked through that viewfinder for so long, and I really found that life was a lot more complicated in front of it without the camera than it is with the camera. I've been retired now for like 15 years, and the news business has continued to change as we all talked. Tracy and I were there for the best of times. We really were. It was the heyday of TV news. We had more money than we knew what to do with because there was only 4 stations. We had the 3 commercial stations. We had PBS. Does anybody know what PBS stands for? Pretty boring stuff. We always looked down our noses at people. But anyways, the money was divided up among 4 stations, and there was no internet. And so we really had a lot of money. Now there are 30 stations in this market, and the pie keeps getting smaller and smaller. Even now, though, when I think of myself, if somebody asks, what did you do? I would never say I was an assignment editor. I was a news photographer. Oh boy, I was a news photographer. And it really, I have so many pleasant memories, and I hope I haven't bored you, but this has really been a pleasure to be able to waltz down my memory lane, and hope you probably saw some familiar things, events that you shared and people you shared them with. A lot of the anchors, they would get questioned. You're the guy that's in my living room. You're in that little box, And so it was a good career to have, and I thank you all for your patience. And I believe Chris is ready with lunch for us. So thank you all very much. Boy, if I forgot this one, you would be, none of this could have happened without a half century of a relationship marriage to my partner, pal, Joe. Now, seriously, there was times we had like 40 people over for a party on May 5th, and I forget what year it was, but it was the year the tornado hit Fort Worth. And we had all this food laid out, and everybody was, having a great time. Had the first 2 or 3 drinks, so we got a little buzz on. And suddenly we get a call: tornado hits Fort Worth, hailstorm hits Dallas. Everybody just scattered. And she's sitting there they were actually doing live shots from our house. But she's suffered all sorts of things like that.